Hello children, today we are going to do a very interesting poem by Maya Angelou, who was an African-American poet and a civil rights activist. The name of the poem is I Know Why the Caged Bird Sings. Children, the name of this poem is the name of her autobiography also. And this poem is one of her well-known and forceful poems that has universal appeal. But this poem is very difficult to interpret, is very difficult to understand because it is full of metaphorical meanings, symbolic meanings. So, to make it very simple, we will first go through the literal meaning, that is the superficial meaning of the poem, and then we will try to understand the symbolic meaning or the metaphorical meaning that is given by the poet. Let's start at the literal level. The poetess says, a free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends, and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. But a bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on a dawn-bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. But a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. So children, on the superficial level, this poem talks about a caged bird and comparing that bird to a free bird. A free bird leaps on the back of the wind. First stanza of the poem has a positive tone. Excitement of free bird is shown here. The victory of the bird, the joy, pride, sense of daring, all are shown here. A free bird, you might have seen the birds flying high in the sky. How do they fly? On the back of the wind, with the current of the wind. They fly, they enjoy the flight, okay? And they dip their wings in the orange sun rays. So it is the evening time against the orange sky, and this bird has the right to claim the sky, and he flies, he dips his wings downstream. But the second stanza starts with but, a sharp contrast. This conjunction gives a sharp contrast. So what is the case with the other bird? But a bird that stalks down the narrow cage. This is the caged bird. So this conjunction shows a contrast. This but shows a contrast with the caged bird. What is the life of this caged bird like? The caged bird, the condition is that his feet are tied, and therefore the bird stalks down the narrow cage, has just a narrow cage to walk, but cannot even walk because the feet are tied and the wings are clipped. So what does the bird do? It is he here, his, pronoun used is his. So he can seldom see through his bars of rage. This bird can rarely see from the bars of rage. These bars are actually the iron bars of the cage, but because the bird is so angry, the bar seems to be the bars of rage, anger. So his wings are clipped, his feet are tied. And what is the only freedom the bird has? To open his throat to sing. The caged bird sings with fearful trill of things unknown. What does the caged bird sing of? Sings of unknown things, but still longs for these unknown things. This is a paradox here. The bird does not know the things, but still long for those things. And his tune is heard so loudly he can sing. That tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. Children, coming to the next page and next stanza, The free bird thinks of another breeze, and the trade winds soft through the sighing trees, and the fat worms waiting on the dawn bright lawn, and he names the sky his own. So there's a sharp contrast, a difference between the two birds. The free bird can think of another flight, okay, another breeze, another flight. And the trade winds soft through the sighing trees. These winds, they pass through the trees as if the trees, it seems they are sighing. So it is personified. The trees are personified here. And the bird, this free bird, has the freedom for food. The fat worms are waiting for the bird at the dawn time in the bright lawns. And he names the sky his own. So the bird names the sky his own. It is obvious that this bird has total freedom to reach high, to fly high in the sky. So that is why the bird is waiting for the another flight in another breeze. But a caged bird. So this stanza, next stanza number 5, again starts with but, a conjunction, showing the sharp contrast again. So this is a shift to the caged bird and his helplessness. The bird in the cage stands on the grave of dreams. These dreams are again, they are personified here as if their dreams are dead and they are buried like human beings. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. The bird screams when the bird has the nightmares. So much so is the fear that even the shadow of the bird shouts. His wings are clipped. That is the condition of the bird. This is a frightening image. Okay, so the wings are clipped and feet are tied, and he opens his throat to sing. The last stanza is the repetition, but this repetition actually shows that hope persists for the bird. The caged bird sings with a fearful, afraid. The bird is afraid, and it sings of, or he sings of, things unknown but longed for still, longs for those things which he does not know. He dreams for those things, and his tune is heard on the distant hill. This is the freedom. For the caged bird sings of freedom, because the caged bird still sings of freedom. He has never experienced the freedom, longed for still which he has never experienced, but sings for that freedom. Maya Angelou herself experienced the worst forms of racial discrimination in America. So she had the longing for freedom. This longing for freedom is expressed in the poem through the two birds. So the free bird here in the poem is the metaphor for white American, and the caged bird here in the second stanza in the poem is the metaphor for African American. So the contrast between the two underlines the plight of the encaged bird and his longing for freedom and equality. So this is one of the theme of the poem, that is racism. Second theme of the poem is yearning for freedom and equality. Another theme, okay. So the poet rightly feels that freedom is the birthright of every individual. So let's study this poem now from the metaphorical or symbolic meaning. Children, let's go through the first stanza quickly. So the opening stanza where we have a talk about free bird. So now if you see, this free bird is the metaphor for the Americans who have every right in their country. So the opening stanza, it captures the natural beauty of the sunset. Free bird, which is the white American, has every right, can leap on the wind, and he flies and he sways with the wind, and he in the evening sky, and he has the right to claim the sky. As he flies, he dips his wing downstream. Okay, he dares to claim the sky. So the reader also has the delightful experience here of freedom of the bird, but whereas metaphorically it is the freedom of the American. But here stands for caged bird. So second stanza in sharp contrast is actually showing the condition of the caged bird, that is a metaphor for the American, black American. So a person who feels restricted as a result of any kind of discrimination, prejudice, powerlessness, of course cannot enjoy the freedom of the fruits of freedom and equality. That is what is shown here, metaphorically talking about the caged bird. So he can only yearn for full freedom and struggle for in different ways. So bars of rage shows his anger, feet are tied, wings are clipped, but opens his throat to sing, the only freedom he has. Okay. Next stanza talks again about third stanza, the caged bird sings. This shows that fearful trill, the bird is fearful. Caged bird again is the metaphor for the black Americans, okay, or African Americans. They dream for freedom, and the poet makes it clear that the voice of tune is heard on distant hill. The voice of oppressed people, their longings, aspirations cannot be suppressed. Okay. The next stanza, the free bird thinks of another breeze. Free bird again is a metaphor for the Americans who are free, for another breeze, for freedom. So there's a contrast again here, and therefore through this contrast, freedom for flying, freedom for food, and names the sky his own. So claiming the full sky as his own. So it is obvious that the encaged bird has no such freedom. Next stanza, but a caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. So the grave of dreams that this caged bird has, again metaphor for black Americans. The dreams that they have, they seems to be dead. Okay, their shadows shout. They have bad dreams, nightmares. They have bad dreams, and they scream and shout, cries out in fear. Okay, their wings are clipped and feet are tied. They do not have any rights, so they can open their mouth still for to let out their emotions. But how does a person look like? A person without freedom can only act abnormally, for the state of captivity is abnormal. The last stanza, it is a repetition, emphasis again on how the bird sings in the cage, but the poet feels that the voice of black Americans cannot be suppressed, and they are made for freedom. Despite all restrictions, suppression, they would not relent and continue to struggle for freedom, which is their birthright. So that is how this poem should be done at two levels. First level is the literal level, where you can talk about this poem as comparison of two birds. One is caged, another is free bird. But at the metaphorical level, this poem has a contrast of black Americans, their lack of freedom, with the white Americans who have all the rights and freedoms. So through the metaphor used of caged bird and free bird, this contrast is clearly shown here, and therefore elaborates upon the theme of racism and yearning for freedom and equality. Children, we have so many literary devices here. Metaphors, as I said, then we have the symbols of sun and wind and hills. Go through all this in the critical appreciation in your workbook to make it more clear, okay, and learn it for the paper. Thank you, children.